Plugin of the week comes from SoundToys. It's SuperPlate. For all of you fans of the Little Plate plugin, this is your dreams answered. This is an amazing new adaptation of that very same plugin, giving you 4 additional options for plugin choice. Some added features like pre-delay, high cut filter, a tweak section that allows you to EQ and add some other additional features which are quite cool. A little bit of a saturation component, separate I/O controls, and everything you'd expect from a SoundToys plugin. They always make great stuff. All right, so let's have a quick look at it. So what we have is the classic EMT 140. So this is the same one that is the that you would have on the Little Plate, and so the expanded out version of this means you have all these additional options that are thrown on top of that. Next up is the gold foil 240. This was an actual gold foil plate. It was actually sort of like aluminum foil and had a different type of reverb sound, a bit brighter, but also quite cool. The Otacon, this is a plate that was created in the 1970s, sometimes called the Plate 2, or sort of like, I guess, like the next evolution of a plate or something. It was not from EMT, right? And then there is a E-Plate number 3, or Echo Plate 3. This is done by Studio Technologies in the 1980s. So again, someone sort of reinventing the classic EMT plate, which goes back to the original version, would go back to the 1950s. They were originally mono. And the Stocktronics RX4000, which comes out of Sweden. So those are your options. So you have some different tones that kind of go along with that. Added features that are here is the ability to saturate this. So you can actually get a tube sound as part of this. So this is the original tube circuit from the EMT. I think it's the V54 preamp tube. Then there is a solid state transistor-based circuit. That is an option here also for saturation, and then you have a clean setting which will not give you any tonal coloration at all. What's cool about this is if you use the first 2 options, you can actually use the input and output controls here to drive that to saturate it. The transistor one also has a compressor where you can't control the settings that's built into it, so they factored that in, so it actually compresses the signal feeding into the plate. So this is also kind of just some additional kind of cool features that can help you shape the tone and character. We have the normal reverb time going all the way up to infinity. Normal plate goes up to about 5. Normal EMT plate goes up to about 5 seconds. You don't really get much more than that. So everything in the red is basically add-on. What you get with the extended reverb time, though, is not something that just sort of sustains out endlessly and is basically the same thing. It will actually also morph or change over time, right? So there's an aspect to this which is not linear, right, in terms of the extended reverb time. Pre-delay is great. That's a nice feature to add in, so you won't have to throw an extra delay plug-in at the head of the track, so that's great to have. Modulation section, instead of just being a switch, now just gives you an option. So you have a modulation range, and then you have a modulation rate, so you can actually control the speed of the movement as well. So that's a nice added feature. The low pass filter, or high pass filter, low cut filter, is here, and you see it's represented in the EQ section here. So it normally defaults to 6 dB per octave, so it's sort of a subtle thing. That's the original on the Little Plate, and you can actually sharpen it here in the EQ section. That opens up by opening up the tweak panel. Same with the high frequency selection here, where you have the cutoff frequencies there, so you can roll off high. Now this rolls off the frequency content of the dry signal going into the plate. Okay, so if you do the wet-dry control and mix it to dry, it'll be unaffected, but if you do this, the wet control, it'll give you it filtered down going into the plate. So this allows you to get rid of low frequency energy from something that's making it over resonate. Generally, the reverb times are calculated at around 500 hertz. But you'll get a bit more low-end resonance out of a plate typically. So the reverb time won't be equal across the frequency spectrum, which is true of acoustics as well. Right, I/O control, wet-dry control, all of that is pretty straightforward. We have the EQ section, so you can adjust it here as well as up here, right? So you have that, and then you have 2 additional EQ bands that you can use that allow you to further shape on top of the high pass, low pass. So you have basically a full EQ here, full parametric EQ with 2 bands in the middle for shaping the sound as well. One of the coolest features here is this auto decay feature. And the idea here is that what you could do is you could set a threshold, sort of like a gate, but instead of shutting off the reverb, what it does is when the, say, vocal is feeding in, for example, and you have a long reverb time, one of the issues is you get a buildup of reverb, right? That's a very common thing. So what this will do is it will allow you, when the signal passes over a threshold, to have the reverb time change to a shorter value during the time when the vocal is singing, and then when the vocal stops singing or when the signal passes back above the threshold, it will move the reverb time back out to the longer reverb time, whatever you set that to be, which is amazing. And then you have a recovery, which could be almost instantaneous when set to a millisecond and up to, what is that, 5 seconds? I'm sorry, half a second, not 5 seconds. So we have that there, okay? Now, the original EMT plate, so we'll demonstrate that feature as well. The original EMT plate was mono. And they created stereo ones, but essentially they were mono input and stereo output. So basically 2 pickups on either end of the plate itself. So essentially a plate is basically just a big speaker. You're basically attaching a driver to the middle of the plate, and then it turns the plate and just basically vibrates it. And then you have pickups that are picking up the energy, and the reverb time is controlled by some asbestos insulation that can be moved closer or farther away from the actual plate itself, causing it to dampen. That's the basics of it. I don't know why they used asbestos. It was legal at the time. Maybe that's why. Anyway, let's get right into it. Let's go through the basic plates here with no other processing here. So let's just kind of keep it wide open, no EQ, no other stuff going on here. Let's just sort of keep it simple, unaffected, and then we'll kind of go through the different options. So this is the EMT 140.
The past is hard for me.
I'll set a little pre-delay.
To get away from those things I've done, I know they can never be undone.
Right, so that's your EMT 40, just like your little plate. Here's the gold foil.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone. Still I'm wrecking homes, broke your heart without a care. Left a trail of tears, lived in fear, and now you're scared.
Let me go back to the beginning here. It's Stocktronics.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
So you get like a good range of different things. Like you could hear the low end resonance in the E plate, the gold foil being brighter. You're getting like a little bit of a different tonal character from each of them. And perfect, right? It's great. Now we can further shape these. Let's see if we could pick one here. Maybe.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
Let's go with the classic 140. I liked this one, but let's just go with this one just because it'll be able to show off the other features and you'll sort of understand the additional shaping if you're used to the little plate. Right.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone. Still I'm wrecking homes, broke your heart without a care, left a trail of...
Right, you could saturate it on its own or just sort of drive it normally. This gives you like a subtle tonal coloration, and then you could exaggerate it with the input-output controls. And then obviously this is unaffected. So that gives you another additional tone shaping. Pre-delay, pretty straightforward.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone.
So let's get to some of the things like the modulation, because that's pretty straightforward. It allows you to go up to 250 milliseconds. Anything more than that, you're going to have to throw an extra delay on. No big deal. Again, we can shape the sound with the filter here.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone. Still,
right, so I got that. I can run some modulation through here. Excuse me, let me reset that.
The past is hard for me to get away. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone.
Right, so you can get a bit of a tremolo effect if you kind of work with a faster rate there and a high modulation.
The past is hard for me.
Right, to get, some movement, sometimes you can make it more subtle. Most of the time you probably keep the rate low, just for a subtle thing. It just sort of depends what the song needs. You could get away with that more. This song is a bit too busy lyrically, but if you have something that's slower, then those long reverb tails can kind of resonate out, and you can get a little more character from them.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
Okay, so we have that. We have the high pass filter. Here's the one thing I wanted to show you here is the auto decay. So with the auto decay, if I set a target here of 5 or 0.5 half a second here, should be the short end of a reverb plate reverb time.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone.
All right,
still I'm wrecking homes, broke your heart without a care.
Right, and you can get it to sort of open up or sort of blossom out of the end of vocal phrases. And so you get a fast attack on it, as you can see. The setting of the threshold sort of becomes critical. If you set it too low, it won't release fast enough. If you set it too high, it won't pull it down enough. So just kind of finding that right balance where it ducks the reverb time. It's so much cooler than ducking the level because you don't get that buildup. There's still a buildup. It's just that it comes out later. This is much cleaner. It actually ducks the reverb time. This is just like, it's genius. I can't believe no one has thought of this before. And maybe somebody has. Obviously, it only looks like I have every plugin, but I don't. And then, setting the recovery time just to sort of make it sort of smoothly transition out, because you can, with a millisecond recovery, you can make it come back real quick, which sort of leans into the ability to sort of create sort of cool effects along with this as well.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
Right, so that on its own is super cool. Then you got the width control. So the width control and the balance control just allow you to move it around. The width control under most as I said, most real EMT plugins would have a mono input and a stereo output. This is actually a true stereo in, stereo out. So if you feed signal in to the left side, it will. Let's do it. Let's take this off here. Feed our reverb in over to the other side. I got to duplicate this here on this track. Okay.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
So you get a discrete reverb left and right when you're feeding into it. So that's an important thing to remember. If you have, for example, a guitar part or something along those lines that's maybe panned off to a particular location, you can control the width.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
Narrow it out a bit and then move it over to the location.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
Right. And this can also kind of be a cool effect where maybe if you had the vocal over to one side and the reverb over to the other side, this is going to sound awful. Prepare yourself.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
You know, but you get the basic idea, right? And then obviously if I make it mono here.
The past is hard for me to get away from.
Right. But so you can get into special effects and all of that sort of stuff. So just it's like a simple thing here. You know, some of this stuff you can just do with your DAW, but cool to have it straight in the plugin. Really cool one. Sounds great. The little plate is just one of my favorite plate plugins that's out there already. This is just that on steroids. It's just heaven. I love it. There's all kinds of things you could do with the EQ, which is great. Again, this is EQing the signal going into the plate. I'll just show you this real quick because this is one thing I was playing around with just for effect.
The past is hard for me.
And then you can control the cue by holding the control key on a Mac, maybe the start key on a Windows. I'm not sure, but you can figure it out.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone.
All right, and then you can, filter it down, create certain effects, narrow it down into a particular lane of frequencies, etc., etc.
The past is hard for me to get away from. Those things I've done, I know they can never be undone.
Right. Create all the special effects you want there as well. Super cool. All right, I'm done. Plugin of the week from SoundToys. SuperPlate. This thing rocks. Definitely have to add it on. If you already have the little plate, get your upgrade. If you already have the SoundToys Complete or whatever they call their full package there's an upgrade price that'll look great too. Check it out. This one's awesome. All right. Plugin of the week. SoundToys SuperPlate.